Welcome back to Real Talk with Susan Stone and Kristina Supler. We are full-time moms and attorneys bringing our student defense legal practice to life with real, candid conversations.
We're going to talk about adoption today. And the reason we're going to talk about adoption is that in our special education practice, we've represented a number of families of adopted kids and the unique issues that children or students who are adopted had, such as attachment issues.
I'm really excited about today's episode because, Susan, adoption is something that you and I have no direct personal experience with, but it's an issue that comes up so often in our cases, and we regularly see the issues that adopted children often experience in schools, and then the issues that the parents and families navigate through as well.
I agree. At this point, I think I've worked on close to 50 to 100 cases where there has been a student with an issue that is directly related to the fact of the adoption status. But again, by the time you come to our office, it's because there is a need or a crisis or an issue that needs to be worked out. I hate the fact that I never get to hear the success story.
I know. I'm excited for today's guests to learn more about the adoption process and some of the challenges, but then also the good things and the success, because you're right, Susan, we don't often hear about that. So
Never. I just want to remind you, remember I always say, we only get to see the dark side of life. Sometimes it's great to see when things go swimmingly well.
with that, let's welcome our guests. Today, we are joined by Becca Gruenspan. And Becky is a single mom who herself has gone through open adoption. She founded RG Adoption Consulting shortly after adopting her son in 2011. And we're so happy to have you with us today.
And do you go by Becky or Becca?
Becca.
Thank you. Okay.
Becca, tell us a little bit about your role as the founder and CEO of RG Adoption Consulting.
Thanks for having me today. I started my business. We're about to be celebrating our 10-year anniversary.
Wow, a decade.
Yes, we're very excited. I started it 2 years after I adopted my son as a single woman at the time who had gone through years of infertility and just really knew I was meant to be a mom and I really wanted to be a mom. So I sought out first on the fertility path. And after that failed, for lack of a better word, I thought about adoption, but it really scared me. Probably for all the reasons you said you don't hear the good side. I was scared because that was all I knew too, as well as all the stories I put into my head about what it meant to have to adopt. And then I was put in touch with, and it was also very overwhelming having gone through so much loss already. And long story short, I was put in touch with an adoption consultant. And I was told that this consultant was going to hold my hand, tell me what to do and how to do it and where to go and what to read and what not to read. And I was like, okay, I could use an easy button around about now. And 9 months to the day that I first called my consultant, I had my son in my arms.
So it was a great experience using a consultant, correct?
It was. Interestingly, I was told because I was in my 40s and single and Jewish that it was going to be really hard for me. But voila, 9 months later, I adopted. So it was a very great experience, also scary. And I knew that after I adopted my son, I wanted to help other people. And I became this magnet to people who wanted to adopt. And I was very passionate about the fact that they really needed help going through this because you don't know what you don't know. Long story, 2 years later, I became a consultant myself. And I thought, gosh, I'm putting all this money into my consultant that I use pocket. I think I can do this now. And so that's when I started my business.
Kristina, I had the privilege of actually going to yoga and having dinner with Becca, and I learned that Becca's not alone in this venture. How many people work for your business?
Yeah, I think my team is 7 or 8 people right now. and we are all across the country. And we only work with the hopeful adoptive parent. We do not work with the birth mom or expectant moms. That's really a distinction between an adoption consultant and other entities such as a facilitator or an adoption agency. We are not.
So you are hired by the potential parents. And just for clarification purposes, you only work on domestic, not international adoptions. Am I correct?
You are correct.
Tell us why. What's the difference between the two? Or why did you choose to just focus on domestic?
I can't even talk to you that much about the difference between the two because there is a big difference. And so it's like you go down one path or the other, as well as like foster to adopt. That's a whole nother path as well. Each path has its own nuances, its own clearances, its own licensing, and each is done very differently and is its own separate path, even though the end result is being an adoptive parent. So I didn't know anything much about international. I know just enough about all three routes that I just mentioned to talk about the pros and cons of each, but not enough to really guide someone through those paths.
Well, certainly, if you chose domestic and that's what your business is focused on, can you tell us what the benefits are of a domestic adoption?
Sure. I think the biggest benefit is the fact that most domestic adoptions now are open on some level. Now, that automatically scares people, and people have all sorts of questions about, is that a good thing? Aren't you scared that your child is not going to want to go back? Aren't you scared that someone's going to show up at your doorstep? And the fact of the matter is, 20 years ago, most adoptions were closed. And what that does is create a sense of fantasy in a child's mind about where they came from and who they are, instead of a reality and an openness about everybody wants to know who they are and where they came from, right? Your identity is such a huge part. It's everything of who you are. And so by being able to have an open adoption, you can know health history. You can have a relationship with the first mom or the birth mom and the birth dad. You can see what kind of life they have. So a child is no longer needing to live in this fantasy world of where they came from, who they are, what other people look like them. There's so much good about a healthy open adoption relationship. And that doesn't mean it doesn't come with some complications. Sometimes it does. And healthy boundaries need to be put in place. It's cousins, right? You're not best friends with all of your cousins in your extended family, but you learn how to live together and navigate the relationship. And some are great and super, super close. And some are a little bit more difficult, and you have to manage that.
Well, it's interesting to hear you talk about the benefits of open adoption, but also the importance of boundaries, because I know that sometimes there's a fear, well, if we do an open adoption, the birth mom's going to come back and haunt us or try to take the child back.
Well, Becca just mentioned it. People think they're going to show up at the door.
How realistic? And of course, there's always extremes, but in general, is that of a myth that's taken hold, or is it something that rarely happens? Or can you talk a little more about that?
It is absolutely a myth. It really, I don't even think I know one situation where that's happened. The laws.
That's really a powerful piece of information there that you just shared with us.
The laws are in place to protect everyone, really. And every state, and this is the confusing part, every state has its own set of laws around when a mother can terminate her rights, like at what point after birth can a mom terminate her rights as a parent, and at what point it's irrevocable. So every state has different laws. So for instance, we tend to work in states where an expectant mom can sign her rights away, can terminate her parental rights between 24 to 72 hours, and then it's irrevocable. You cannot change your mind by law unless you can prove that they were made to sign under duress or fraud.
You mean 22 to 72 hours? I want to clarify after birth.
I'm sorry, ask me that again?
You said 24 to 72 hours, but I just want to clarify for our listeners, you mean after the birth of the child?
after the birth of the child. Now, that's just some states. Every state has different laws about the length of time you have to wait. Some they can sign right away, but then they have 30 days to change their mind. That's scary for for an adoptive parent. That's also nerve-wracking, I would think, for a birth mom who just gave birth, who had already kind of worked through all of this. Hopefully they were getting good options counseling and went through all the things to make sure that this decision was the right decision for them. But again, every state has their own laws, and we tend to work in the ones that are more compact.
So does your business focus on the potential parent that wants to adopt until what point? Do you take them through when the baby gets in their hands, or are you there to provide support and services throughout the life of the adoption, the childhood?
Great question. And this is, I think, what differentiates maybe RG adoption consulting from other consultants. So we have a 4-step proprietary process called the adoption roadmap. It's very...
Tell us about the roadmap.
Yeah.
Take us in.
The adoption roadmap has 4 different steps to it. So we work with, to answer your question simply, we work with people from the very, very beginning. I want to start the process and I don't know how, all the way their contract ends once they bring their baby home. However, we work with our families for a lifetime. So the 4 steps are this. One is we educate people about adoption. So we want people to understand what the process is going to look like before they start it, so that there's not any real surprises as they're going through the process. And then we help them find the right places to go to get what's called a home study, which is the legal process that they have to go through to be approved to be able to adopt a baby. So every person has to go through what's called a home study. Somebody comes to your home, they interview the people in the family, they make sure you have the right finances, they do FBI clearances, all of that, to be able to make sure that you are who you say you are and that you are able and well to take care of a baby or a child in your home. And then the second step is the storybook process, where you put together what's called an adoption profile, the storybook of your life through pictures and letters. Think Shutterfly book, but we do even nicer ones because we work with a designer. So we help them do that, because that is the sole tool that's used for an expectant mom to choose who she wants or who they want, if dad's involved too, to parent their child.
Wow, is it like a dating app almost? In a more detailed book?
Pitch for your family, right?
Yeah.
You're really showing an expectant mom, what is your child going to look like in our life? Let me try to give you a little bit of a picture, a little bit of peek into our window of life.
Wow, tell us what goes in that book. I'm so fascinated.
It's really cool. And this is where I love working with families, because I get to know them on such a deeper...
I'm sure that process personalizes everything
Like
for
you show the house, the family dog, the kitchen, what's in the cupboard.
You know what? That might be a good thing. I'm going to use that next time. What's in your cupboard? But it's funny you should ask that. But sometimes it's exactly those little details.
Sure.
Mom go, oh my God, I can relate to this, or I love this about them. And sometimes people don't realize how important those little details are in their life. Who are their friends? What does their friend makeup look like? Is it diverse? Is it not diverse? Does everybody look the same? Does anybody have tattoos? Do they not? Do you have dogs? What does your family look like? Where do you go on vacation? Where do you work? All those things are really important. And so the pictures are important. The words are important. The stories are important to really relay and get the feeling of your personality across. So I hate to use the word marketing tool, but if anything, it is a marketing tool on who your family is. And a lot of people don't understand either that in most cases, an expectant mom chooses the family. So it's like they both choose each other. She first chooses them, but then they have to also say, yeah, after learning about her and her situation, we choose her too. And then a match is made.
Becca, I'm wondering if an individual or a family really want to adopt domestically, how likely is it to be successful in the process. Are there instances, is it common for a family to maybe not be chosen or be able to adopt? Or in the US, is it generally if a family or individual wants to adopt, they'll be able to?
Yeah. So to help answer that question, I'm going to explain my step 3 in the process, which is where they put together their agency portfolio. So let me ask you guys a question. And this is a question I always pose to people wanting to find out about our process. When you go to a financial planner and you say, here's $1 million I want to invest, wouldn't that be nice, first of all? Will that financial planner say, great, we're going to put it all into this one stock?
No, you diversify.
Exactly. And that's the strategy that I use with my family. So instead of putting all your eggs in one basket and signing up with one agency, say, we're going to pick the largest agency, it's $15,000 up front, and they have great success. I say, why don't we sign up with 3 or 4 agencies for $5,000? And that way you're at way more places. Plus, when agencies and attorneys are stuck and either don't have the right family for what an expected mom is looking for, or maybe they don't even keep a list because sometimes that's a pain for them, they'll reach out to me and say, do you have any families for this particular situation? So now I have a family who's at 4 agencies that they've signed up with. Plus, I'm getting situations every month that I'm sending to them. Their chances of matching successfully are so much higher because their profile is in front of more people. They're seeing more situations. So to answer your question, it's a very high percentage of people who are successful. In fact, the people that I have worked with who have not been successful are really, truly only the people who give up. If you don't give up, your chances are very high to adopt.
Are there certain adoptions that are more difficult, such as you mentioned that you were single, Jewish, female? Are interracial differences a problem? Same-sex couples? Like, what is the most, I'm just curious about
Profiles that are chosen more often or less frequently.
So the ones that are most difficult are families with multiple children already. I'd say if it's a couple, if you're both over 50, and if you're single over 50, that's going to be more difficult.
I can see that. Yeah.
Yeah. And then the more narrow your criteria is, the more difficult it's going to be. As open as you can be, the easier it's going to be. So sometimes people will come in and have a gender preference and have a preference on, or very narrow on, they don't want any drug exposure or they don't want any mental health.
Yeah.
That would be much more difficult because then we're looking for more of a unicorn. And those people are not placing their babies.
Yeah.
And those people aren't the children that cannot handle because of their life situation to parent at that time. So you have to
Wow.
be open and you have to do a lot of education to understand who is an expectant mom. And typically, it's a woman who has multiple children already, who can't hold down a job because she can't afford childcare and parenting, who can't afford another child, and maybe just lost her condo, so is going from family member to family member or a friend to live with.
Heartbreaking.
Yeah. And maybe a birth father isn't involved and he has 5 other children of his own that he doesn't support either. This is just one scenario. There is no 2 scenarios that are the same.
How do the kiddos that have come
Yeah.
from birth mothers who have used alcohol and or drugs fare? We deal with that population, and the cases again that we see, it's a rough road.
Right. The impact of fetal alcohol syndrome is lifelong.
Yeah. The good news is we do not see alcohol as an issue as much as drugs. Opioids, we all know about the opioid epidemic in the world, and that certainly translates into the expectant moms and the birth moms that we are seeing and that our clients are working with. Alcohol is rare, more rare.
With the babies, how long do those babies go through withdrawal at birth?
Yeah. What I have seen through my client's eyes is typically 3 to 5 days.
Oh.
Sometimes less, sometimes more. But the good news is these babies are so resilient. And we have had many an adoption medicine doctors speak to our community, and the children fare very well. They do well once they go through that withdrawal. And I'm talking the drugs more than the alcohol, but opioids, they tend to thrive really and grow up just like any other child as it pertains to that substance exposure.
You're listening to you speak. It's really reminding me or making me think about what a complex process adoption is emotionally in terms of for the parents or individual who are adopting the child. It's an exciting and happy time, maybe some anxiety as well. But at the same time, how do you reconcile that with the idea that perhaps a beautiful thing in your life is beginning on the heels of a heartbreak or a tragedy in someone else's life, whether it's substance abuse or whatever the circumstances are for why the child is being put into the adoption system. And so how do you talk to parents about that or prepare them to work through all those competing emotions?
Well, you hit the nail on the head because every adoption starts with trauma. It starts with loss. And it is. And imagine being in a hospital and on one side, and I have the chills talking about it, on one
Oh
side,
my gosh, me too. I'm just thinking about it.
are so excited that their dream is coming true. On the other side, you have a woman who is doing the most difficult thing that she could ever do in her life and probably is really suffering because of this decision that she had to make for whatever reason. And in the middle, you have a child that is feeling, maybe not consciously yet, both sides of that. So this child is growing up having experienced loss for the very first breath of their lives. And that stays with them. We try to do another thing that really differentiates RG adoption consulting is the education component. So education and community, I believe, are two things that you cannot go through this process without. You need education, which never ends. I am almost 12 years in, and I learn something all the time about what my child is experiencing and the different developmental stages and how they process identity issues at different stages. And if I didn't commit to continually learning from adoption professionals and trauma specialists, I wouldn't understand how to be the best parent for my child. So when you choose adoption, you really have to know that it's at least an 18-year commitment and that you have to commit yourself to continuing to learn about your child. Because if you don't, your child is going to know that it's going to affect your child. And ultimately, everybody wants to be a good parent to their child, right? And if you're not doing the work, that's only going to get in between your relationship with you and your child. And so there are so many layers. So education and community, just being around people who understand this in a way that nobody else does. As well-meaning as our friends and families are, they don't know.
I just want to interrupt. I remember when we had dinner.
Yeah.
And I made the comment that children who get to land in wonderful homes are so lucky. And you really corrected me, rightly so. That is not a great way to frame adoption because there are aspects that are unlucky. And we all have visions of Daddy Warbucks and Orphan Annie and everybody's dancing off the stage. But we have to remember that as wonderful as your adoptive parents are, children are conflicted. When does that conflict get integrated, or does
If
it
ever,
ever?
yeah.
That term lucky, right? Everybody can feel lucky individually at different stages throughout this process, right? From all different, we call it the adoption triad or the adoption constellation. So it's the adoptive parent, the birth parent, and the adoptee. If somebody says to my child, wow, you're so lucky. You guys are so lucky you have each other. That doesn't give my child who may be struggling internally because of the adoption, that doesn't give him room to have those feelings of, wow, why does struggle of all the feels? Because that puts so much pressure on him to have to feel like, oh, I'm supposed to be really grateful to my parent.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of pressure for someone to go through life feeling I can't ever talk about what I'm experiencing as an adoptee. I don't look the same as anyone else in my family, but I'm supposed to be this one way because everybody tells me how lucky I am.
That is really powerful food for thought. Susan, I would have
it.
made the same gaffe that you did. And it's just a different perspective that I'd never thought about. And I hear you, Becca. Thank you for sharing that, because I hadn't really thought about the alternative considerations. And
When I made the comment and you responded in such a poignant way, it's obviously stuck with me, and probably will stick with me for life, because I was like, wow, not that, all children, I know I have the talk with my kids, you don't appreciate me. I think all parents that feel that way. Have you ever said that to your kids?
never. I feel appreciated and valued every day.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm still working on it, and my oldest is 25. And I do say that to my kids, show a little gratitude, but we have to remember the circumstances. Well, Becca, I could talk to you forever. And in fact, this is my second time talking to you, and still have more. So we might have to do a part 2 with you.
Okay, I would love that.
And it's just great having you.
It's been wonderful talking, and a lot of good information for our listeners out there. And we are really appreciative of your time today. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Real Talk with Susan and Kristina. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to our show so you never miss an episode. And leave us a review so other people can find the content we share here. You can follow us on Instagram. Just search our handle @StoneSupler. And for more resources, visit us online at studentdefense.kjk.com. Thank you so much for being a part of our Real Talk community. We'll see you next time.